Welcome to another episode of Pirkei Avot. We're still on chapter 4. We're going to do Mishna 15, B'ezrat Hashem, and we're dedicating this episode in memory of Levy ben Moshe Esther and Elisheva Yael bat Leah Levy, and also in memory of Binyamin ben Moshe Esther. Okay, I'm going to hand you over to Michael.
Thank you, Rabbi Mashiach. So this Mishnah will introduce to the teachings of Rabbi Elazar ben Shmuel. And who was he? He was a Tana of the fourth generation, the last of a small group that formed Rabbi Akiva's final disciples, who were ordained by Rabbi Yudah ben Bava after Rabbi Akiva's death. A wealthy member of a family of Kohanim, he left his indelible influence on the development of the Talmud. A later authority, Rav, called him the most excellent amongst the sages, and another expressed boundless admiration for his goodness of heart. He merited a long life, which he attributed to three reasons. He says, I never made a synagogue a passageway for my convenience. I never trod over the heads of the holy by coming late to the hall of study and forcing my way upon crowded students. And I never raised my hand to give the blessing of the Kohanim without saying the benediction before it. The students who gathered to study with him were indeed so numerous that they had to crowd and squeeze together, 6 to the square cubits, to hear him. In his unsparing devotion, he would teach on, not pausing for a regular meal, so that his students would often have to do with dates and grapes that were brought before them. One strong indication of his prominence is that while Pirkei Avot added his father's name to distinguish him from the others titled Rab Elazar, the Mishnah generally calls him by his first name alone. So what does Rab Elazar ben Shmuel say? He says, Rab Elazar ben Shmuel Omer, Yehi kavod talmidcha choviv elecha kashalach. Let the honor of your student be as dear to you as your own. Ukavod chavercha kamora rabach. Umora rabacha kamora shamayim. And the honor of your fellow be like the reverence due to your teacher, and your reverence for your teacher like the reverence for heaven. So, very interesting. Rab Elazar is telling us that respect for your students is very important, and this points to a humility of character, because most teachers sometimes can be driven slightly by ego, because they know that they are on a supposed to be on a higher level as from their students. But in reality, if you want to get the best out of your students, you have to connect with them. This is very, very important. You have to show a little bit of respect. It doesn't mean that you demean yourself by showing respect. In fact, a really clever student regards that as something very, very endearing. And in fact, a lot of us, if we all look at our lives, the influence of good teachers cannot be overstated. Some of us can recall primary school teachers that had massive effects on our development. Absolutely. Because they were of a slightly different disposition to other teachers. And there were other teachers that perhaps were as good academically at teaching, but you couldn't connect with them and you didn't learn from them. And I think everybody who's listening to this can think of few teachers in their lives that have had profound effects on their developments. Don't forget, these are formative years, so these are extremely important people in our lives. And if we are able to be persuaded to learn and have to get a love of learning from them, that they can be like guiding lights in our life. They're not just teachers. This is very, very important. So what does Rab Chaim of Volodin say about this Mishnah? It's quite brief. He says regarding, let the honor of your student be as beloved to you as your own. He says, people tend to underestimate the value of their associates. In order to avoid treating someone with less honor than he deserves, always treat him as if he is on a higher level than you believe. If you view him as a student, treat him like yourself, like one of your colleagues. If you regard him as a peer, treat him like your teacher. If you view him like your teacher, revere him as you would revere Hashem. So,
one thing I wanted to mention, actually, I saw from the Rambam in Hilchot Talmud Torah, that talking about honouring a student, you can honour the student, but you shouldn't really do it in front of his Rav, unless you see the Rav is already giving honour to the student, let's say, or his students in different situations, that then you'll be able to do that. So how would that show itself in practical terms? So the Rav would make the student perform certain duties so that it would give responsibility to the student, and then the student will now feel his own sense of importance. So that's how the teacher can give achrayut, give responsibility and kavod, and knowing that the student will perform it and will use it to give him self-esteem, etc. And I can see here in the Pirkei Avot that there's a story of Rav Belsky. Rav Belsky was a contemporary. I think he might have been a Talmud of Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, the great Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky from America. So Rav Belsky said once he came after davening, and he saw somebody came up to Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky and asked him halachic she'elah. So Rav Yaakov, instead of answering it straight away, he turned to Rav Belsky, who was there at the time, and he said, ask Rabbi Belsky. Now, think about it. When you are told by the Gadol Dor that you are to answer a question, that gives you a sense of self-worth and importance that's never going to leave you. So that's what we're talking about, how Rav can give responsibility to a student, and that will carry him through the rest of his life, and he'll realize that my teacher believed in me, otherwise he wouldn't have asked me to paskin that she'elah.
And that can be a great source of energy. When a teacher believes in his students, the student can do anything. Very important to understand. So the concept of the teacher must also honor his students. Rav Chanina was quoted as saying, "Much Torah did I learn from my teachers and from my fellows more than from my teachers, but from my students I learned most of all." It's very important that you can learn a lot from your students. I think there was that great scientist Richard Feynman who said the best way to learn a subject is to try and teach it. So if you've been learning about a subject, try and explain it to somebody. And if you can't, I think it's called the Feynman Technique. The technique is, if you place a student in front of you, you want to test your knowledge, your own knowledge on a subject, try and teach it to a student. Now, if you can explain your subject, however complicated it is, in his world it was quantum mechanics. If you can't explain it, or similar physics problems, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old child or to a child who's in primary school, you don't understand it well enough. You go back and you try and understand what it is what you don't understand. So everything can be, if you can't teach it to a child, you don't understand it yourself. So when you try and teach somebody something, you're taught more about the subject than perhaps they are, because you are able to understand where your pitfalls lie in your understanding.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, and that's echoed by Rav Chanina, as we just heard. So, also we learn at the beginning of this perek, who is honored? He who honors people. In Proverbs, in Mishle 27:19, we read, "As water reflects the face to a face, so is the heart of man reflected to man." So in relations between people, there was a sort of law of reflection. If you show a friendly face to your fellows or for your pupils, they will generally find you friendly, and their faces will in turn become friendly and respect others, and they will respect you. If you degrade and discredit your students, they will return the compliments. Rav Elazar ben Shamuaz affirms this in principle, in emphasis of the need to respect our fellows. But he extends it also to students. They are, people as well. So we also learn this concept of how important teachers are in God's eyes. It says in Devorim 6:13, funnily enough, the Lord your God shall you revere. It adds before the word for Lord the particle et, which adds nothing to the actual meaning. But the Talmud recounts that in every other instance in our written Torah where this extra, apparently superfluous little word is found, one Chacham would always interpret this as it extends or enlarges the meaning of its verse. Here, however, you wouldn't necessarily bestow this concept when it says about Hashem as inclusive of anything mortal, because there's no equivalent to Hashem. But Rabbi Akiva taught that the word et is meant to include scholars of Torah. This we learn in Gemara Pesachim 22 on the base. The awe and reverence that we feel when we become aware of the reality of Hashem, the power of intelligence behind the world existence. Let us regard that with this veneration the scholars who study and teach Hashem's words.
Amazing. And there's a bit of a backstory there, because the Gemara explains who preceded Rabbi Akiva. There was somebody called Rav Shimon Amsoni, and he went through the whole Torah and he gave a darush on every single time the word et was mentioned. Aleph Taf. Every single one, except for one, which is the one over there that says et Hashem. And because of this, he couldn't fathom out that last one. He rejected all of them. He said he probably ended his life at the end of his life. He probably died not knowing this. But many years later, Rabbi Akiva came along, as you just rightly said. He darshan that et, and he sort of retroactively rectified what Rav Shimon Amsoni had said those many years ago. So that when we talk about Hashem, the equivalent is the purveyors of the Torah of Hashem. It's very, very important. We have to show them great reverence.
Yes, and talking about reverence, there's an interesting concept that's brought by Rambam in his Hilchot Talmud Torah. He tells us to have yirah for our parents, and he also equates the respect of yirah due to a teacher, the same as what we owe to a parent. So what is this level of respect? The morah due to a parent is defined in detail in the Talmud. You are not to stand in your father's place, where he normally stands when he meets his friends and talks to them. Also, you are not to sit in your father's regular seats. In the same way, these are all applicable to your teacher. You are not allowed to flatly contradict him. Obviously, you can't embarrass your teacher by in public contradict him. And also, if another elder and your father or your mother or your teacher has a divided opinion, you are not allowed to decide in front of them who is right. It's very important. Rambam defines this in his Hilchot Talmud Torah. And lastly, I wanted to bring one beautiful source from the Torah regarding this. From in Avot do Rav Natan, there is a very interesting passage about this Mishna. And it's in keeping with the belief of our Chachamim that everything in our tradition, there is some source in the Torah. It reads, so where do we learn that his student's honor should be dear to a person as his own? Let us all learn from Moshe Rabbeinu, for when he said to Yoshua, choose for us men and go forth to battle with Amalek, this was in Exodus 17:19, it does not state choose for me, but rather choose for us, indicating that he ranked Yoshua as a master, as himself, as he equated his own honor with that of Yeshua, although he was the master and Yeshua was his disciple. Now, where do we learn that the honor of one's fellow should be as dear to him as his master's? From the verse quoted in Numbers 12:11, and Aaron said to Moses, "O my Lord." So Aaron referred to Moshe as "Oh my Lord." Now, this was not his. Wasn't his. Moshe was a younger brother, but Aaron gave him the kavod and ranked him as his master. And where do we learn that the honor of one's master should be as dear to him as the honor of heaven, as the honor of Hashem, as it is stated in Numbers 11:28? And Yoshua, the son of Nun, the attendant of Moshe since his youth, answered and said, "My Lord Moses, confine them." He ranked himself equal with the divine presence, for he used the same form as address, "My Lord." He referred to Moshe as "My Lord." So there's some beautiful examples from our Holy Torah supporting this Mishnah, which was Mishnah 15 from Pirkei Avot.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael. Next time we convene, we're going to be talking at Mishnah 16 about Rabbi Yehuda Bar Elai, who is the contemporary of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So that's going to be a very exciting Mishnah. B'ezrat Hashem. Until then, we wish you a wonderful and blessed week.